one of the most accessible and yet profound texts that Kabbalah has provided. It is the Alter Rebbe's Tanya, and we're in chapter 48. So it's been a few years, so if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see all the classes stretching back several years, right to the first chapter. And it really is beyond just a book. It's like having a private audience with a great kabbalistic master. If you're with us at the beginning, the Alter Rebbe said, the reason I'm writing this book is because I have too many Hasidim, too many disciples. I can't possibly see everybody. And so instead, I'm writing this book, and it has all the answers I give to everybody. I know everybody. I know what category you're in. I know what problems come up. And in this book is all the answers I would give to everybody, and also a detailed system of how I bring somebody up, how I get them to work on themselves, how I get them to grow as a human and as a Jew for years, through a whole life, as they're coming to me from the first visit to the 10th visit, and I make them a chassid. I make them live according to Kabbalah. And although it may seem strange to Western people, this idea that a tzaddik, even once they're passed away, or if you don't see them personally, that's not who they are. The physical body, that's not who the tzaddik is. That in fact, their Torah, their mitzvahs, their teachings, that is their identity. But the more you learn this book, the more somehow that becomes something you relate to, that when you open the Tanya, you're actually having a yechidus, having a personal audience with a great kabbalistic master. And even if you don't know it in your brain, your soul knows it. So, you know, your soul has that meeting, and it sends a little something down here. There's a little ping you get in your consciousness. You're like, this is different than another book. So maybe just be that, because we're all here in North America. We're very rational people. It's hard for us to relate to this, but give it a shot. It's not so bad. So we're having another audience with the Rebbe. We're on page 740 in this edition of the Tanya, if you want to order it. And we're in the middle of a whole section on learning about reflected love. Learning about reflected love. This is a powerful meditation. There's a whole section dedicated to it, based on the idea, and it's a principle in Kabbalah, that if I love you, even if you know it, you don't know it, if we're next to each other or we're across an ocean, if I express love for you, somewhere in your heart there's an automatic reflected love. Automatic. You may not know it. You may have to put it aside. If it's a toxic relationship, you may say, no, I'm putting a restraint on that love. But you're restraining something that's flowing, that's automatic. So that principle, that dynamic, it applies to people. And we got a powerful meditation in the beginning of our section on a king that pulled a peasant out of a dung heap. And then we said, look at our relationship with God. And if we could understand how much God loves us, and that is creating an automatic reflected love, there'd be no struggle whatever. We'd wake up in love with God, in awe of God. We'd be our highest self all the time. And then the Alter Rebbe said, and it's not just that happened way back in Mitzrayim, because that was what the mashal, the example, was about. It was about God taking us out of Mitzrayim. It actually happens every day. When I say the Shema, when I close my eyes here at Temple Israel and say the Shema, and if I'm in a minyan, I say the Shema, I may just be here listening to the music and enjoying the company, maybe, but my soul is now out of any possible limitation. Again, I might not be consciously aware of it, because my relationship to my soul, that grows through my life. I may be very aware of it. I may go into what they call dvekus and cleave to the infinite, and great. It's a real pleasure. But whether I am or not makes no difference. I could be a goat looking at the moon. The moon is still the moon. I could be a very physically oriented person. My soul still has that unity. It still has that unity. And when I say the Shema, my soul is consumed in this oneness where there's nothing except the one infinite source. And that is Yitziat Mitzrayim. That is coming out of Mitzrayim. It happens every time. It happened this morning. If you said the Shema, go ahead and say the Shema now. It'll happen then. It's just accessible like that. And so once we recognize that love that God has for us, and that it's so accessible, and that God is expressing it all the time, now, just reflecting on that a little, love is ignited in our heart, and we can use that for everything we do here at Temple, everything you do in your life, at home, with your family, whether it's your passive or Seder, elevating that. It's a beautiful thing. Speaking of which, let's do a little diversion before we start. And by the way, before we finish, anyone in here who wants to buy some matzahs, I have 3 here, and I could bring some more next week. But let's talk about matzah and what it means according to this tradition. According to this tradition. We've probably talked about this before. What's the difference? And let's open the conversation. What's the difference between a loaf of bread that's made from a pound of flour and a matzah that's made from a pound of flour? What's the difference between the two? What's the main difference?
The bread rises.
No leavening.
Leaven. The bread rises, right? So what does that look like?
It's bigger.
I'm seeing hands do this. This is bigger. It's bigger.
Looks like a loaf of bread.
A loaf of bread. Puffy, delicious, full of air, right?
That's a lot of air.
A lot of air. So I'm looking at a big challah like this, or a matzah that's like this. How much of this big challah is flour? I don't know, say a third. How much is air? Maybe 2/3. You can check. I'm guessing. I have no idea, right? But amount of it, the big part, it's not really the flour. It's just air, right? And it makes it delicious and wonderful and it tastes better. All this pleasure associated with it. We love a nice fluffy challah. So what do we do on Pesach? First of all, we're commanded to eat matzah. We're commanded to eat matzah, right? So you don't. Third day of Pesach, you don't have to eat matzah, but on the Seder, you have to sit down and eat a minimum amount of matzah. Second, we're commanded not to eat bread, but what else? Not just not to eat it. What else? What? No, about the chametz. What's?
You gotta get rid of it.
Gotta get rid of it, right? So you can't just have it. You can't just have it. I'll ignore this chametz. I won't eat it, right? It's not like I just had a meat meal and I'm not gonna have dairy, but it's in the house. You can't have it, and it goes beyond that. Not just that you can't have it. What do you have to do with it?
Sell it.
You have to sell it.
Okay, that selling it is not having it. Selling it is a legal way of not having it. But there's something else we do with the candle, and what do we do?
Use clean, use sweet, use
Yeah. When you find the last crumbs of chametz, what do you do with them?
You burn them.
You burn them. You burn them. So every other dietary principle, there's some minimum beyond which, usually, there's some minimum beyond which it doesn't matter. Right? I'm cooking a nice chicken soup for Shabbos, and I'm making a nice pot of tea, and I pour the milk into the tea, and oops, bloop, there's a splash, and the milk flies, and a drop flies through the air and lands right in my chicken soup. Is my chicken soup still kosher?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why?
There's a
Ratio, 1 in 60, right? You have 1 part in 60 parts, it's like it's not there. And there's all kinds of halakha, you can taste it, whatever, but it's like it's not there. So why is it that if there's 1 crumb of chametz in my house, I have to find it and burn it? Shouldn't it be not there if it's so small? That's all pointing to something very important that this all represents, right? What is chametz? Chametz is when something looks bigger than it really is. It puffs itself up. It's interested in pleasure.
It's ego.
It's ego. It's ego. So in my life, I can also become puffed up. Right? I go through life. I'm a pound of flour. I am who I am. And someone says, Cantor Smolash, your high notes are so good. Poof. Right? Oh, my high notes are good. Maybe I'll sing some more. Poof. Right? Oh, Cantor Smolash, we're so happy with your class on Kabbalah. Poof. Oh, look, I'm such a nice person. Poof. Right? And over the year, by the end of the year, I'm this big, big challah, and I forgot that I'm just a pound of flour, and I look like a 3-pound challah, right? So what do? If we're serious about the Tanya, if we're serious about this kind of work on ourselves, you have to start by being able to see yourself clearly. You have to start knowing I am a flawed person. I have my things I'm working on. I have my narishkeit, and I'm not going to overdo it. I'm not going to overdo that and say, oh, I'm the worst person in the world. Look at me. I'm such a big Rasha. I'll be honest about my standing, but just look at myself clearly. Otherwise, I can't start because I think I'm something I'm not. So how do we do it? We get rid of the chametz. That is getting rid of the ego. And then when you eat the matzah on Pesach, that actually kabbalistically gives us what I call a superpower. A superpower. It gives us an entry to be able to keep my ego in check for the rest of the year. So yeah, it's a mitzvah. Yeah, it's a nice tradition. Yeah, it reminds us of the labor in Mitzrayim and all the rest, and that we left historically, and there was no time for the bread to rise. It's all true. But mystically, when you're at your Seder and you're eating that matzah, have in mind that's giving you the power to keep your ego in check for the rest of the year. And people take it very, very seriously. Students of the Tanya, when you get to that moment in the Seder, if you've been to one of these Seders, absolute silence. People are eating. It's a big amount of matzah. A kazait, I don't remember all the halacha. If it's supposed to be 1.5 or something, I'll look it up. But the amount is like about that much of a shmora matzah, and people are eating it in silence, and it's a meditative moment because they realize they're accessing the ability to overcome your own ego, which is hard. It's hard to pull yourself down by your own bootstraps, as it were, right? So after class, I'll say, I've got some nice shmora matzahs here. I've got an oat one, I've got wheat ones. I don't remember the cost, but if you give me $20, I'm happy to hand these out. And other people, if you want to order, just email me at msmolash@temple-israel.org, and I can get more and have them here at Temple on Thursday with your name on it. And basically, I know we have all kinds of traditions. We have a Seder at dinner time. Pesach is really, really late this year if you follow when the sun sets, which kabbalistically is a reality, not just astronomically. So the sun sets super late, and like the Seder, I think it's like 9:30 that has to start. It's a crazy late time. So at least this matzah, if you're doing it with this in mind, the best way to do it is to wait until after 3 stars and then say the blessing and eat it without any water, without putting margarine on or anything, just as is. And that's going to be like plugging in your ego nullification. Yeah, if you have a Seder with your family and you don't want to drive people crazy, have a Seder whatever time, do what works. But like eating this for this purpose, Kabbalistically, it's definitely, every great master Kabbalah says, when the sun sets, when 3 stars appear, a window opens, and there's not much point me streaming the Super Bowl before the Super Bowl starts, right? I could sit down, I can say, I'm free at 11 a.m. even though it started at 2, so I'm going to sit down and watch the Super Bowl at 11, open up the stream and watch, but there's still a Super Bowl that's happening that's later, so same thing here. So I know that's not a Reform stance, so that was a Kabbalistic bracket in Reform setting. Any questions before we go in? Big smiles all around. Okay, let's jump in. 740. Ki kulam nimtzaim me'a mitato yitbarech. Rick, why don't we... Oh, sorry. Linda, why don't you unmute and go ahead, top of 740.
For all of the created beings are derived from his true reality.
So we're in a section where we're talking about God's oneness and that nothing else has any reality of its own, and that there had to be a big tzimtzum, a big contraction of that oneness for the world to come to being. V'devar ze ein bicholet hadam lahasigo al borio v'chulu.
And this thing is not within the power of human beings to comprehend clearly, and so on.
Right? And so the specific point was that the way God knows the world is just by knowing God's self. Because there isn't a world, there's only God. That's the real reality. And how does God know everything that's happening? Because, like, if I stub my toe, I know I stubbed my toe. I don't need a report on it. I don't need someone to make a video and a documentary and I'll watch it, then I'll understand. I stubbed my toe. It's me. I know it. Something in me, I know. So that's how God knows the world, by knowing God's self. And that's because God is knowledge, knower, and known. That tells us that the whole world is just God. God knowing the world doesn't make the world separate from God, like in our knowledge. God knowing the world is still godliness. It's still God. Because God is the knowledge, knower, and known all together. And he's saying no human brain can process that. That's beyond even the greatest genius. But we have negative knowledge. We know that we can't understand it. And we know that God's knowledge is different than our knowledge. So at least we have negative knowledge about it. But that gets us all confused, so we'll go on. And then we summed up this note that there's a big debate about whether this was true, that you could say God is the knowledge, knower, and known. And the Alter Rebbe solved it by saying, before the major tzimtzum, when it was just God, you can't say it, but after the major tzimtzum, you can say it. So if you're talking about the worlds, the created worlds, yes, now you have vessels and lights, and you can say God is united with God's knowledge, God is knowledge, knower, and known. But before that tzimtzum, now you're trying to define something that is so infinite you can't define it as that, and so there, the complaint was correct. But the Kabbalists are correct after that major tzimtzum. Within Bria, certainly, you can say God is knowledge, knower, and known. כמו שכתב הרמב"ם, זיכרונו לברכה. And Paula, you want to take first on 742 as Rambam?
Paula said her microphone wasn't working.
Oh, okay. Rick, why don't you go ahead and holler it out for me?
As Rambam of blessed memory has written, that God is knowledge, knower, and known.
והסכימו עמו חכמי הקבלה, כמו שכתוב בפרדס מהרמ"ק, זיכרונו לברכה.
And the scholars of the Kabbalah have agreed with his views, as is stated in parties of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero of blessed memory.
Right. Cordovero was the Arizal's teacher, so the Arizal said, that's right, God is knowledge, knower, and known. וכן הוא לפי קבלת Arizal, זיכרונו לברכה.
This is also in accord with the Kabbalah of our master, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria of blessed memory.
So the big Kabbalists agree with that. בסוד הצמצומים והתלבשות אורות בכלים כמו שנתבאר לעיל פרק ב'. Go ahead, Linda, you can start over again.
No.
Oh, sorry.
In the mystery that is the doctrine of contraction and the clothing of the lights of the Sphirot and the vessels of the Sphirot, as has been explained previously in chapter 2.
All right, thanks, Dan. So that the Maharal complained about it. The Arizal and everybody else said, no, it's true. The Alter Rebbe said, well, before Tzimtzum and after Tzimtzum, that's why. So before there is a complaint, after it's true. And back to our text. Hare, and Linda, you'll be next. Hare diazo me'achar shehi bivchinat ein sof eina nikret b'shem mitlabeshet b'chadur ha'aretz shu bal gvul v'tachlit ela ma kefet v'sovevet.
This knowledge then, since it is of an infinite order, is not described as clothing itself in the orb of the earth, which is finite and limited, while God's knowledge is limitless, but as encircling and encompassing it.
And then we get back to how we started, that there's a light that actually relates to the world, and it's creating the world with its qualities. A book looks like this, can open but doesn't run around. A hand can open and close. Air is transparent and gives us life. Every element of the world has light that is relating to it, that is giving it its qualities. But this knowledge that we're talking about, this infinite knowledge, that is sovev kol amin, that is surrounding the world, not spatially. It's still here also, but it's not expressed in any way. It's so infinitely beyond the world that we are so insensitive to it. There's nothing that is perceptible about it. So we're right here in the place of that light, but that light is surrounding in that it doesn't express in any way. That's that first light that had to be hidden away for the world to even start to come to being. Av shi'yidiyah zo kolelet kol avyo v'tocho b'fal mamash.
Even though this knowledge embraces its entire thickness and interior in actual reality.
So if you recall, and we're wrapping up this chapter, we had an example of if I were to picture a car in my brain, that car, the whole image of the car is in my brain in every detail, down to the last nut and bolt and gear. And yet, if you walk by my car, would it express in any way that I'm thinking about it? No. It doesn't, the car in no way perceives, it's not aware that I'm thinking of it. No one walking by could tell. That is a surrounding knowledge of that car. I'm surrounding the car in my mind, but it's nothing to do with the actual car. Same thing with the Ein Sof, as the Ein Sof is aware of all of the cosmos. The difference being that the Ein Sof's awareness of the cosmos is the actual life force of the cosmos and is still bringing it into existence, except it's so infinitely beyond it, has nothing to do with it. It's surrounding, it's unrelated. And it does go through the entire thickness of the world. God's aware of every quantum point in the world and things happening and living organisms and minerals and whatever's going on. And God's awareness is giving it life, and yet it's still described as surrounding because that light is so infinitely beyond us. ומהווה אותו על ידי זה מאין ליש.
Thereby giving its existence ex nihilo.
So it is actually making out of nothing. That light is making us out of nothing, but without any possibility to relate or be expressed. Is explained elsewhere. That finishes this chapter. This chapter was the moach, the intellect of the Tanya, just like chapter 32 is the lev, the heart. This is the brain. So very complex stuff. The take-home being, God had to put so much aside. God had this infinite light that God had to completely ignore and put aside and say that I'm not going to relate that to the world. Now I've got this light that could relate to the world, but I'm going to put that aside as well. I'm going to have a major contraction just to create the world of Bria, which is the first potential for creativity, right? There's nothing there except the ability to create things, and then the souls that are there, they're so limitless in their potential. They relate to the world that the only identity they have is that they could be created, right? And then there's another contraction for the world of Yetzirah, and there's another contraction for the world of Asiya, and then of course you get a final contraction to get the physical world, and inside all those worlds there's infinite contractions as well. And we spend a moment thinking that God held all that back. That God said, no, I'm going to leave space for you. I'm going to leave space for you called free will. I'm going to leave space for you called you have the ability to choose to love me or to serve me. Not like the angels, it's automatic for them. I want to leave space for you because I just want to see what you do. It's like you're so dear to me, right? Like when you have a baby and you get a toy and you want to bring it home and see, is your son or daughter gonna figure out, whether it's physical mechanics or reading a book. You don't want to do it for them. You want to watch them figure it out. There's such a joy, and you hold yourself back with such a love so that they can have space to do it. And they can even make mistakes. Uh-oh, they're not going to like what happens there, but let me let them learn, right? This is safe, this is fine, let me let them learn. And you hold yourself back. So God was holding God's self back so much, and here's the kicker, and it brings us to 49, not just in Yetzias Mitzrayim, not just coming out of Mitzrayim, and not just every day when we say the Shema, but that love of holding back all that light and ignoring all the huge angels in the world of Bria and everything else, and just saying, no, take that away, block that, no, leave that away, finally, boom, for you. That'll happen at the beginning of creation. That'll happen when did God's love for us start in holding everything back? At the beginning of creation, God said, no, I want a Smolash, and I want Smolash who can make mistakes and figure it out and learn, so I'm going to, even now at the beginning of creation, I'm thinking of Smolash, right, in 2022, and I got to hold back all this light just so he has a chance to figure it out himself. I love him that much, right? And if you consider that, now, this love that God's expressing for us, it goes back to the beginning of everything, and then the reflected love is even more powerful. And that's chapter 49, which we'll start. Any questions? Thanks for joining us online. You can write your comments here on Facebook. Happy to bring them into class. I'll be watching. Any questions here before we... Clearly not. Okay.
Yeah.
7:45.
Can you stop recording?
What?
That's one of the questions.
You have a question.
Souls. Animal soul, divine soul.
Yeah.
How does that relate to the light? Which light is that?
Yeah, so a soul is actually not a created thing. A soul is an emanation. So unlike everything else in the universe, which God had to hold back light and then at some point create a thing that's separate, and now that's a creation in the world, that it comes from Bria, our soul has, the divine soul is an actual piece of God, as we said, right in chapter, was it 2? Right? Our soul is an actual piece of God, so that's not a created thing. That's a piece of God coming in, walking around the world, pretending to be a separate whatever, right? And the animal soul surrounds that, and the divine soul encloses itself in the animal soul, so there's even more ego, as we learned on Pesach. And now I can forget that I have a piece of God in me. I think I'm just myself. But ultimately, our soul goes up right back to God. So, yeah, the physical body, that's a created thing, and a lot was invested in that, as we'll see. But the divine soul, at its core, is just godliness. V'hinei av ki prate b'chinot ha'hester v'helem or ein sof baruch hu. I don't know where we're reading.
I think so. even though the particular aspects of the nature of the obscuring and concealment of the infinite light of the Blessed Answer.
So here, all the things we talked about, the tzimtzum and the surrounding light and the filling light and the three contractions to make the world and the infinite others. והשתלשלות העולמות עד שנברא העולם הזה הגשמי עצמו מספור ומינים ממינים שונים.
In the descent of the worlds, descending as they do ever lower until this material world was created, are too numerous to count and are of many diverse kinds.
So it's incredibly complex. There are people, because one of the things you meditate on is the hishtalshalut of the creation of the worlds, the sort of chain of events, so to speak, that led to the creation of the worlds. And the more you focus on that, you can transcend those worlds. So that's a study. That's not what we're here in the Tanya to do. We're here to learn how to be a Bainani, how for it to be close for us to express this love in our life every day. So it's incredibly complex. Kayadua latoamim me'etz hachayim.
As is known to those who have tasted of the tree of life, the Kabbalah.
Right, so tree of life in this context, there's Eitz Chaim, tree of life, and there's Eitz Hadas, which is Nigla, which is standard halakha and Torah knowledge. So Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, that's learning Torah, that's learning Gemara, that's learning halakha, that's learning Shulchan Aruch. That's normal Torah knowledge. That's Eitz Hadas, the tree, and we can relate to it. Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, that is the kabbalistic level that we're trying to connect to here in this class, each in our own way. Right, so if anyone who's ever delved into that and created a relationship with that, you recognize, oh, that is incredibly complex, all the different contractions. Yet, ach derech klal hem shlosha minei tzimtzumim atzumim klalim li shlosha minei olamot klalim uvechol klal yesh ribo rivavot pratim vehem shlosha olamot bria yitzira asiya ki olam hatzilut hu elokut mamash. Now we are, Linda. Yet in general.
Yet in general, there are three levels of powerful and comprehensive contractions, giving rise to three comprehensive worlds, each category consisting of myriads upon myriads of particulars. These are the worlds of Beria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, for the world of Atziut is godliness itself.
So if you've been with us, you've learned the various worlds, which are really categories of worlds and infinite worlds in each. Not sci-fi worlds where other things are happening, but just more and more abstract sources of the worlds that are underneath them, so to speak. So it's all one timeline, but time doesn't exist in Atzilus. There's a different kind of thing that you could call potential for change, maybe, right? Maybe in Bria, but it's all worlds above this. It's not like there's different realities where I'm where I'm a poet instead of a cantor.
I have a question.
Yes, Eleanor.
I just read the comment below about Azilut. I thought Azilut was the reaction of a contraction. It was the beginning.
It is. So like always, it depends what you're talking about. So the whole Tanya takes that question, is Atzilus godliness and contraction starts after that? Or is Atzilus itself from a contraction? And it gives us a shorthand just to start working on ourselves. And the shorthand is, in the Tanya, Atzilus is considered godliness. It is an emanation from God, and it's just a part of one category. And he says contractions are one for Bria, one for Yitzira, one for Asiya. And there's three general levels of contraction, and we work that way. But in any other text on Chassidus, you see that this was really a shorthand. And of course, there's a big contraction before Atzilus, and there's even before that, there's many, many more. You go back to Adam Kadmon, and there's there's you can get lost in endless. You don't know where to stop, right? Because it's always, oh, well, that's Or Ein Sof, but that's just the light of the Ein Sof. It's not the essence of the Ein Sof. And so just to keep us sane and to give us a kind of a shorthand to work with, in the Tanya, Atzilus is considered godliness. And then the first contraction he really talks about is what created Bria. But if you're talking about if you're talking about Atzilus, now you have to say there was a contraction that created Atzilus, because even though it is godliness, it's called Atzilus, right? And so it's an emanation. So an emanation is not absolutely infinite anymore. So something had to contract before that. So you're not going to get a straight answer from anybody on that, because we got to hide infinity somewhere if we're going to talk about it. But by the way, if you want to see the best example to meditate on this is an aside. You say, how can I relate to these three contractions? Why is there three? What's going on here? Remember, we are an image. We're created in the image of this, and our structure reflects it exactly. And the way our soul relates to each of these worlds reflects it exactly. So if you want to try and find a little something to relate to what that contraction was before the world of Bria, well, look, we have three main components in our reality, right? I have my physical aspect of the things I do and say. I have my emotional aspect of the stuff I feel, the stuff my emotions that I have. And I have my intellectual aspect of how I look at the world intellectually, my patterns of intellect, my power of intellect. Those are kind of three different worlds, as it were. Like when you look inside, it's not quite clear exactly how intellect relates to action. I mean, it's its own world, right? And same with emotions, it's its own world. And yet, one sort of leads to the other. If I think about something, then I can have feelings about it. But how does the intellect become feelings, really? It's not so clear. Like, it's very complex how intellect becomes feelings. And how do feelings become action? When I care about something enough that finally I start talking about or saying it, that again, there's like, what happened to the feeling that it could become an action? There's some kind of, there's a shift, right? There's like the world of emotions, and then somehow something comes out of it that becomes a physical action. But could you tell me how the emotion became an action? Like there's something stopping the emotion where the emotion ends, and now physical action can begin, and yet it's leading to it. And that really is the way we map out these contractions. If you want to say, and this is me, right? But this is this Kabbalah. If you want to say, how can I relate to this contraction before Bria? Well, what is it that happens before any intellectual insight happens in me? Right? If I try and go back before, then I say, where did that come from? It started like a point, and there was nothing there beyond the point. I can sit and meditate on that point for as long as I want, and there's just an emptiness, and I can get knowledge from that, but there's still kind of a mystery beyond which I don't know where that came from. That's the contraction. It's not the contraction. That is my map inside of the contraction that happens before Bria. So the more I understand myself and my chokhmah, my insight, and where it comes from, and what that process is, and I feel the roots of how it is that I fish in consciousness for that spark of chokhmah, that's the best way for me to relate to, at least, that contraction that happens before Bria, because I'm a map of that. So then Bria, that's the world of intellect, but then there's Yitzira, the world of emotion. At some point, my intellect starts to create emotions, and understanding that interface of how intellect inspires emotions, and that's what we're learning to do, to meditate, to create productive emotions, integrated emotions. The more I understand that, there is a contraction there where that intellectual world stops, and now an emotion flows, and an emotion sort of had its roots in the intellectual world, but an emotion is not intellect. But it's still, the emotion has within it the seeds of that intellect, but it's not intellect, right? So that shift from intellect to emotions, that is our map inside of the contraction between Malchut of Bria, the bottom of Bria, and Chokhmah, or Keter, of Yetzirah. And the same thing, of course, with the contraction before the world of Asiya. At some point, I feel so strongly about something, I get up and I do something, and it's not so obvious. We do it every day. It's not so obvious. How does an emotion lead to action? I mean, I could have a very strong emotion. Why would that automatically lead to action? What's that about? I mean, we do it instinctively. We don't think about it, but how does an emotion drive action? And what is it where there's still emotion contained in that physical action, and yet the physical action is totally neutral and independent, nothing to do with how I did it. I put $1 in a pushka. My emotion's not there in the dollar, but somehow the emotion led to it, right? So if you look at that interface between my emotions and my actions, that is our map of the contraction that is between the world of Yetzirah and Asiya, and so on. So we can kind of get a sense of it, but again, that's not really the point of this chapter. That's a little aside, and let's go on. Uchdei livro olam habriya shehen neshamot u'malachim elyonim asher avodatam l'Hashem bivchinat chokmah bina dat hamitlabshim bahem. Is it Eleanor? You ready already?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah, Rick, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, me? In order to create the world of Bria, which consists of the higher souls and angels whose service to God is in the sphere of the intellectual faculties of Chabad, which are clothed in them. That is, godliness is revealed to them in an intellectual manner through the three intellectual faculties of Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat.
So, in order to create this world of Bria, so the four worlds, Atzilus, that's emanation, Bria, that's creation, Yetzira, that's formation, and Asiya, that's action. Right? So that second world, which is the top of the three worlds we're talking about, to that contraction that happened to get from godliness to Bria. And what is Bria? Bria is the not the very, very biggest tzaddikim like Moshe, but really the historical tzaddikim, like major tzaddikim. Their souls, even when they're down here, they just relate to the world like they're still in Bria. All they see is this is God's creation. That's all. They're not aware of any separateness. They're not aware of any you and me. They're not aware of any. It's just this. All this is God's creative energy. That's their natural. That's their go-to conscious state. So imagine, and of course they always want to help because they just see God's creativity and God's chokhmah in this, so they want to do the right thing. And angels. There's all main angels are in Yetzirah because they're emotional beings, but there are some mainly seraphim that are in the world of Bria, that are intellectual beings that have intellectual capacity and vast knowledge of godliness, much more than we can imagine. And those are also in the world of Bria, but there's no angels in Atzilus. In Atzilus, there's only a few, like Moshe's soul stems from Atzilus, but Atzilus is mainly godliness. An angel can't be there because an angel, like you said, an angel is a created thing. Stam. Like, there's no question an angel is a created thing, so above Bria, above the potential for creation, there can't be an angel, it's just godliness. But a soul like Moshe, that actually stems from Atzilus and is higher than the angels, and ultimately every one of our souls is rooted in has a piece of God itself. That's its root. And another aside, you actually see it in the Torah when you have great tzaddikim and their names are called twice, like Avraham, right? And I think it was Yaakov, it happened to Yaakov, right? I may be wrong there. They all have a line between the two. When it says Avraham, there's Avraham line, Avraham. There's a psik in the actual Torah writing. It's a piece of cantillation. And the Zohar comes and says, Moshe was the only person, when God said Moshe, it was without a psik. There was no separation. And why is that? Because Moshe's soul was so refined, so innocent. It was exactly like it was above, down here below. That's why Moshe couldn't, he was so spiritual, he could barely speak, right? He's like, what is this crazy thing called physical speech? I mean, it's all godliness. Like, who's talking to who? Like, he never wrapped his brain around this thing called speech because he was still a soul in heaven, exactly here, exactly as he was there. So even compared to Moshe, even Avraham, there was some physicality, there was some change that happened when he came down. Moshe, it was nothing. He was drawn out of the water, right? That's his name, Moshe, drawn out of the water, and exactly the same here in the world as he was in the spiritual worlds, in the water, in the hidden worlds.
I have a question. Either last week or the week before, you talked about Azilut and you talked about Malhut was Shekinah. How does that fit into the picture that you just described?
Yes, so Shekinah is another term, and Shekinah is more the dwelling aspect, that it has a way to manifest of the divine light, whereas Malchut is more the ruling aspect, that it has authority over something, right, from Melech. But they both refer to the same thing. They're both the lowest sphera of any one of these worlds, and they're where that world actually expresses. So all the other sphirot in that world, they shine a light into Malchus. Malchus receives that light and then creates a world, because Malchus can actually relate to a world enough to create it. And then Shekhinah is now, okay, when Malchus is actually apparent in some way in the world, that you call the Shekhinah because it's dwelling in the world. But they're really just, they're synonyms for the same thing with different implications. Vehem masigim umekablim mehem.
And they, that is the souls and angels, apprehend them and receive influence from them, from Chabad, which illumines them.
Right, so the light of Chabad illumines that world, they receive influence from it. To make that happen, all that mysterious stuff, hayat chilat tzimtzum atzum kaniskar la'el.
There necessarily preceded a powerful contraction, as mentioned above.
So God had to hold. Think of all this stuff. You know, we dream of being in touch with angels and how beautiful they are, and this world, and you know, the whole light of Atzilus and everything. To create that world, God had to hold so much back. I got this infinite light. No. I'll ignore you for 7,000 years, right? Forget it, right? I got this whole world of Atzilus. It's such a glorious, amazing expression, emanation. No, forget that. Like that's, and one by one, God just took everything and, you know, put it in storage and you know, put it on hold and took it offline, and finally held so much back so that we could be here.
So too from Bariah to Yetzirah.
And then let's do 2. Ki or me'at mizer hamidlabesh ba'olam habriya adayinu bifchinat ein sof legabe olam hayetzira.
For the minute portion of light, minute that is in relation to the light found in Atzilut, which clothes itself in the world of Bariah, is still in a category of infinity in relation to the world of Yetzirah, so that the light of Bariah had to undergo a powerful contraction before it was able to descend into Yetzirah.
Right, so we have this whole meditation. You could sit for 10 minutes or 20 minutes and think, God has this infinite light, and God's holding it all back now, still, just like the beginning of creation, for me. Right? That's a big sacrifice to make, and then do it all again for the next world. Because, by the way, Malchus, or the Shechina of Bria, that now has to create a world of Yetzirah, and compared to the world of Yetzirah, the world of Bria is infinite. So you're starting all over again, and you can't even start with the bottom of the world of Bria, because that light is infinity compared to the world below it. You got to block that again, do a siluk, and just take it all away, and then use other contractions, whether it's like you have a wall and there's a pinhole in the wall and you're just getting a little bit of residue through that, or like a hair, like imagine the life that's in your brain and your head and contract that to one hair coming out of your head, and imagine that the light from this world is just the amount of energy of one hair from what preceded it. And other kinds of contractions, many contractions. We can't fathom the amount of holding back. All that just again on the next step, and then the next, and then contractions within each world. So it's just endless holding back, endless sacrificing for our sake, and putting away all this beauty, all this light, all this self-expression on God's part, so that we could come to be. Dan, you look like you're brewing on something.
Yeah, are we referring to each of us passing through the stage till we're actually born? Our soul is passing through these stages, and then we are formed.
So the question is, are we referring to us coming through all these stages until we're born? Right. The answer is both. Yes, we're referring to us, and we're referring to the creation of the world, and we're referring to the divine light and what it's doing, because it's all the same process.
So the rabbi that died in Israel, just a couple
the big
of weeks
ago, yeah.
He obviously, from a young age, his destination was to study in Torah and his whole life.
Yeah.
So did he get like the same as Moses for,
Yeah, so here are your questions. So a big tzaddik, let's say, I'm not an expert on tzaddikim, let's say he was a complete tzaddik, one of the big ones of our generation. Let's assume his soul was in Bria, for the sake of argument, right? Probably. Right. So my soul is coming down through this whole process that we're describing, because when God creates the world, God has to block every world, now just physical reality, you see no godliness. My soul, as a typical person in our generation, came down through all that. Here I am, I'm a piece of God, and then whoa, I'm also active as a soul in the umbilical cord of my soul in this world of emanation, and bloop, now I'm active in the world of Bria, and bloop in the Yetzirah and Yesiah, and then finally my soul, when we hit the very bottom of that, of what's going on in the Hishtashlut in creation, my soul flows through all that, and when I hit the very bottom, Malchus of Asiyah, the very bottom of that, Now I pop out and I relate to my physical body very, very well, right? Because I wake up and I'm hungry, so I eat, and I'm tired at the end of the day, so I sleep, and I want to look nice, so I buy nice clothes, and I relate to myself physically very easily, and I relate to the world physically too. I see a house and it's nice, and I want to buy it, right? I have these urges. So my default is I exist as a consciousness down here, time, space, and consciousness. That's my home base. A big tzaddik, they want to come all the way down. They want to follow me all the way down. They'll come down through Atzilus. Maybe they hit the first one and they hit Bria and they say, whoa, I could be separate from God. I could be a created thing. And that's it. That's all the processing that went on with their soul. And then they were born in that state. And their whole life, their go-to is, hold on, that's interesting. I could be separate from godliness? What an idea, right? Oh, let me explore that, right? But not, I could have feelings of my own and an ego with my own sensitivities. Not certainly I could care primarily about my physical urges and relate to the physical world as if that's really the main thing. Like, they don't even understand that, right? To them, it's the same way I could walk by I could walk by a field of grass and I have no urge to go eat it. And a horse walks by a field of grass and he wants to leave the carriage and go eat the horse. It's an urge for the horse. I'm like that horse. I have an urge to eat the grass. A tzaddik is just walking by going like, why would I eat grass? It's, I'm a soul from Bria. That's not my... So yeah, a great tzaddik, their soul doesn't come all the way down through this process. Most of us have gone down through this whole process, but we have great, great infinite meaning and work that we do. And the two are maps of the same thing. So our soul is a map of the creative process of the cosmos. And as we're learning, the best way for us to understand it is, as you're doing with your question, trying to understand myself and what's going on with my soul, because that is my looking glass into the whole Kabbalistic picture. Let's meditate on that.
I have a question on that. So are we saying a tzaddik is an angel?
No, a tzaddik is much greater than an angel.
Okay.
Tzaddik is much greater than an angel. An angel doesn't have free will. An angel is a created thing that follows God's will 100% and can't do otherwise. And it starts in Bria, or it starts in Yetzirah. But a tzaddik in particular, their soul, like all of ours, starts right. It's a piece of God, and it comes down. And yeah, tzaddik, a great tzaddik and an angel can both live in the world of Bria, so to speak. Their souls can be rooted there. But a tzaddik is much greater than an angel because it comes from it has a piece of God in it. An angel is just a created being.
So are you saying that their soul doesn't contract as much to come down to our world?
Yeah. Let's take a few moments to finish off. A lot of ideas, so let's just still our mind. It's okay to just get the general impression of what we learned. Let's go down. Let's do a little pre-Pesach meditation here, because we should live with the times. So just find yourself in a seated position, any comfortable position, or lying down. Let your breath slow and deepen. In many ways, breath itself is also a map of everything we've been talking about, so let it flow evenly, smoothly. The more smoothly my breath flows, the more smoothly my soul flows through consciousness. Let's start our counting technique. So I'll count 4 breaths in, 4 breaths to hold it in, 4 breaths out, 4 breaths to hold the breath out, and then start over through your nose if you're comfortable, starting and breathing in. 2, 3, 4. Keep the breath in. 2, 3, 4. Breathing out. 2, 3, 4. Keep it empty. 2. Starting over in. Keep the breath in. And back out. Stay empty. Keep going at your own speed, breathing in. Keep that cycle going until it becomes natural, intuitive. We'll open up our wisdom gateway, the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. That is a good gateway for Chokhmah, for wisdom to enter. It's the emptiness, the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. Let that open and try and just stay there as you continue to cycle your breath. Let's place this divine concept in our wisdom gateway. So we'll paint this in our minds, as it were, in that empty space. You know, the matzah we're preparing to eat on Pesach is the abnegation of all our ego. Just cleans all that out, burns it up, leaves us exactly with a clear view of ourselves. Let's picture that moment and that matzah and that ability to have bitul of nullification of ego. Let that image fill your mind. All the details of that image, what it might mean in your life to be free of ego. If you're picturing it in a small screen, put it onto a much larger screen with color. If it's still, let it be animated and moving. And of course, if you're dissociated from it, then put yourself right inside it. That's your life, my life. Burning up all the ego with the power of that matzah, that opportunity that our tradition gives us. And perhaps have some feelings of the duty of doing this, feelings of being responsible to myself, feelings of relief, who knows. Just track those emotions that are flowing out of this meditation. And then let's close by seeing those emotions attach themselves and flow into productive action, whether it be my words, my conscious thoughts, my behaviors in the world. Let them be motivated by these productive emotions that are flowing. Feel free to stay in this meditative posture for 10, 15, 20 minutes. You can pause your computer and remain here, but if you're in the class, let's wiggle our fingers and toes, open our eyes. It's a pleasure learning with you. I won't have a class next week, so I wish everybody a happy Pesach and a kosher Pesach, a beautiful chance to reset your own game, get your ego out of the way, and really start from an even more honest place. So thanks for joining us. If you want to join us on Zoom, in class, wherever, just email Maya at temple-israel.org, and she will send you all the links and all the schedules. Sei gesund.